Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming, in spite of the terrible weather that we have today. Um, Today, I am Dr. Lina Vyas, and then Dr. Stuti Rawat is going to present our research finding. Okay, so we're going to be presenting our research finding, which is about the online higher education in Hong Kong. Now, this has become a new normal in higher education these days, and I will be doing a brief introduction, after which Stuti is going to take over. Now, as you all know that when we talk about higher education going online, it is something that was done even before the rest of the world had actually thought of going online. So we have been giving online education since 2019. And there have been a lot of stories, there have been a lot of information about how online education has been delivered in Hong Kong. But then there has not been any real systematic study that gives us the evidence how this has happened in Hong Kong. Now, another thing that is unique about our study is that, we don't only look at what the students think about the online education that they receive, but we are also looking at the staff, because it is a big change that has actually taken place both for the staff as well as for the students, right? Even for the staff, they have, had a lot of issues because they have had to learn something which is completely new. And at the same time, they have had to spend extra hours, which has in some way impacted their work-life balance. Now, our study has been done in collaboration with some researchers in the National University of Singapore and the London School of Economics and Political Science. Now, we managed to get 505 students respond to us, whereas we also got 391 staff, including 350 staff that were actually involved in the online teaching and learning exercise. Now, the survey period was last year, but then we have done quite a bit of qualitative interviews in this meantime, and we are going to present the result, which is mainly related to Hong Kong. And for Hong Kong, we did a survey, which was, using both the closed-ended as well as open-ended questions. Now, the same study was also conducted with some of the graduates in Singapore. So we are only going to concentrate on the Hong Kong information here. But of course, we will be making some comparisons so that you know how students have received the online education differently in these two places. The main objective of our study was to actually see how the students as well as the teachers in tertiary level perceive online education, right? So we want to see not only how the students have reacted to this huge change that has taken place in higher education, but we also want to see what is the impact that has been there on the teachers. Then we also want to see specifically that if there has been any change in the work-life balance of the academic staff. Because when we talk about online education, the word flexibility comes in, right? The word, the concept of work from home comes in, right? So we have for a long, long time been debating whether it will be better for people to have a more flexible way of life to be able to get better work-life balance, right? So this was an opportunity that came in front of us where we could actually see whether the work-life balance improves when the staff was given more flexibility as well as have the opportunity to work from home. And then finally, now we know that online education is going to be there on and off as long as the pandemic lasts. So we have to make sure that the online delivery of classes is as effective as it can be. Okay, so in that way we are trying to see how people, which is the student body as well as people who are delivering the lectures, how do they feel and how would they make the online system more effective. Now, like I mentioned, that we have 505 students. So we got a very good mix of gender, though we have majority of the students who are female. So, and then for the age, we have got majority of the students in the age group of 20 to 25. Right? But then when you look at the data, you can see that we have been able to get views from all different age groups. So it is a very good and comprehensive data. Then again, when we look at the staff, again, we have a good mix here. We have got 54% of females and 46% of male teachers. And again, when you look at the age, you can see that there is a variation of the age that we have been able to gather as well. So this is what I would introduce our study as, and then I pass it on to my colleague Stuti, who is going to be talking about the findings. Thanks.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you so much, Lina. So Lina has already introduced the study to you, and through the next few sections of this presentation, I will be talking about the findings. Now, our first major finding relates to the perceptions of online education, and we present the results that we found for certain select dimensions. As Lina had mentioned, our survey comprised of both open-ended as well as closed-ended questions. In the open-ended questions, one of the questions which we posed to both students as well as teachers was, what are the 3 big challenges of online education as perceived by you? And based on the responses that we received, we plotted a word cloud, which basically plots which presents all the words that were reported in these answers, and based on the frequency, the size of these words is displayed in this word cloud. So some things stand out when we look at the answers from students as well as teachers. For instance, the challenge which is perceived in terms of communication, interaction, engagement is felt both by students as well as teachers. There are also other challenges associated with concentration and attention, again, which are felt both by students as well as teachers. There's something new which we found through our survey, and which is the role played by motivation. And this was a unique finding in that both students as well as teachers reported motivation being an issue with online education. It was expected that technical challenges would be a constraint which would be voiced by both stakeholders, but there were also some new insights that came up through these answers. For instance, some students spoke about getting tired easily, and it's also a phenomenon known as Zoom fatigue, which researchers at Stanford have written about. And some teachers also spoke about issues related to cheating and about privacy issues, which can be a concern when it comes to online education. So in order to triangulate these findings with the close-ended questions that we asked in the survey, we found that close to half of the students reported feeling less motivated when they were attending classes online as compared to a traditional classroom setting. And similarly, this view was also echoed by their teachers, who said that they expressed greater difficulty in motivating their students. 54% of teaching staff felt this to be the case. Now, why that is a problem is because other research has shown that motivation is an important factor that is linked to academic achievement, learning outcomes, as well as course completion. Another finding, which was especially unique in case of Hong Kong, is the constraint which is posed by physical space. So at least a fifth of the students, and this was close to 21% of the student respondents, indicated that they lacked a quiet and undisturbed space at home, which would be adequate to fulfill their online learning requirements. Similarly, almost 58% of the students indicated that their ability to concentrate during online classes was lower as compared to classes attended on campus. And while those were some of the key challenges that were cited with respect to online education, there were also some things which were specially appreciated about it. So 62% of students valued the opportunity to learn via online classes during the pandemic. And a vast majority of the respondents, which includes both students as well as staff, considered that in light of the pandemic, a shift to online education was very timely. When we posed the same open-ended question to students and teachers in which we asked them what are the 3 best things that you like about online education, we received certain answers which were quite salient among the two groups. So as you can see, flexibility, time, saving were some common words that appeared in their answers. As Lina mentioned, the flexibility offered by online education was cherished by respondents, both students as well as staff. They were also appreciative of the time and resources that were saved in commuting. In our survey, students reported that they appreciated the ability to record lectures. And close to half of students also credited online education with enriching their learning experience as well as strengthening their problem-solving skills. Another salient result with respect to academic staff was the fact that close to 67% of them valued the opportunity to learn to use new technology because of online education. So on one hand, while we found challenges, on the other hand, we also found that there were certain very positive features associated with online education. And now in this slide, we take a quick detour into how these results compared with results from the Singaporean sample. Of course, bearing in mind the caveat that the sample in Singapore varied in terms of its strength as well as in terms of the sample characteristics. But we found 4 key results. The first was the fact that in terms of access to individual and environmental prerequisites for online education, so for instance, things such as uninterrupted internet access, access to a laptop or other electronic devices, or even access to a quiet and undisturbed place to be able to attend online classes. In all of those parameters, the Singaporean students reported better access as compared to the students in Hong Kong. The second finding was that students in Hong Kong also expressed a lower level of confidence, a lower level of pre-existing proficiency and confidence in terms of familiarity with software and other online platforms and technological gateways. The third salient finding was that, like the students in Hong Kong, even the students in Singapore felt motivation was a strong factor associated with online learning, and they reported feeling less motivated during online classes as compared to traditional classes that are held face-to-face. However, overall, we found Hong Kong students to be more positive in the overall evaluation of online education. So when it came to questions that assessed whether they felt online education had enriched the learning experience, or whether they felt that online learning had helped them advance their problem solving skills, on all of those questions, students from Hong Kong had a much more positive experience and perception as compared to students in Singapore. A second set of findings relate to the question that we posed at the beginning of the study: is work-life balance impacted during online education? And we found that yes, indeed, it is. And one of the salient findings was that there is a real struggle for work-life balance with online education. A high proportion of the academic staff indicated these struggles, which is close to 40% of the respondents, of the staff respondents, and a large majority, which is almost 60%, perceived the workload associated with online teaching to be higher as compared to traditional classroom teaching. Interestingly, there was no gender skew to these struggles in achieving work-life balance. So in the context of other research that has been carried out in other countries and contexts, what is frequently spoken of is this gender bias wherein female or women workers tend to bear a disproportionate burden of household duties, and hence they are disadvantaged in terms of work-life balance. However, in our study, we did not find such a gender skew. Both male as well as female staff respondents expressed this struggle in achieving work-life balance. What we did find, however, that age tends to play a role. So younger staff tended to be more comfortable with technology, and hence they were more likely to view it as less of a challenge as compared to relatively older age staff. So in the survey, we found fewer staff in the age group of 25 to 35 years cited technological challenges as compared to those in the 36 to 59 age group. In light of those findings, we propose some policy recommendations which also go on to answer the third question which we posed at the beginning of the study, which was how can we make online education more effective? And in answering this question, we focus not just on making online education more effective for those receiving it, that is students, but we also want to make online education more effective for those that are dispensing it, that is academic staff, faculty. So we recommend a three-pronged approach in dealing with some of the challenges posed by online education. The first prong of our recommendations focuses on pedagogical strategies. By this we mean strategies which teachers can employ in the classroom and which can be used to increase motivation and as well as interaction in the classroom among online learners. So the first recommendation that we pose in this respect is using game-based learning to increase motivation. We found through research conducted in other contexts that game-based learning appears to motivate not just students, but it has also been used in workplaces to increase motivation among workers. And given the fact that the new generation identifies a lot with, identifies and enjoys playing online games, we think this is a possible tool which can be leveraged on and which online education does provide a platform to use and tap into. The other strategy associated with our pedagogical recommendations is using the data that we can obtain through online education in a strategic manner. So for instance, Zoom chat records allow us to ascertain which topics or comments or queries appear more often than others, and these can allow instructors to focus on those key questions and address those key difficulties. Similarly, the other ways that data can be used strategically is through the discussion forums, online discussion forums, where students have a chance to engage with their peers. During class, the technological features offered by many online platforms allow instructors to conduct in-class polls, in-class quizzes, which can make learning a lot more dynamic and a process which is a lot more engaged for the students. And even for the faculty, it can help reduce the associated workload which would have been associated with, say, grading a quiz which was administered on pen and paper. A third recommendation, again falling in the pedagogical basket, is assessing Zoom fatigue so that classes can be structured accordingly. And there's a hyperlink under the term Zoom fatigue here, because that hyperlink takes you to a questionnaire which has been developed by the Stanford University, which assesses the extent to which an individual is fatigued by Zoom by asking a range of questions. And by assembling these responses, instructors have the chance to evaluate where their students lie along that spectrum and with respect to the level of fatigue with Zoom. And accordingly, classes can be structured which provide breaks if the level of fatigue is high, which have more in-home activities if students are already fatigued by the increased amount of screen time. If, on the other hand, that is not the case, then instructors do not need to make those accommodations. A second set of recommendations are at the university level. And we believe that in the context of Hong Kong, physical space is a very important attribute that is provided by university campuses. So allowing students access to existing infrastructure such as classrooms which are not in use can help provide a space for students to attend online classes. It goes without saying that in order to implement such a measure, universities would have to make sure that students adhere to social distancing guidelines. Perhaps provisions can be made for those students that are already vaccinated, and there could also be a system wherein students RSVP in advance whether they would like to use a classroom facility, so that a ceiling can be imposed so that only up to a certain number of students have access to that space, and so that even their habitation of that physical space during the time the lecture is taking place is done in accordance with healthy social distancing practices. The other recommendation which we have at the university level, and this pertains to how the load for staff, academic staff, could be reduced, is with respect to the relaxation of non-teaching expectations and the provision of additional resources in order to help manage the additional workload that's associated with online education. To cite an example, the University of Washington relaxed some of their non-teaching expectations for academic staff that were on the tenure clock, keeping in mind the constraints that were posed by online education and the constraints that were posed by the pandemic. And this is something which is definitely worth giving consideration and thought to. Finally, our third tier of recommendations relates to what can be done at the public policy level. Research has shown that when it comes to online education and some of the technological barriers that can be felt, or the gaps in environmental and individual prerequisites related to online learning, a higher share of those tends to fall on students that are from a vulnerable section or that are coming from disadvantaged households. So, catering and targeting those group of students, the government could offer more scholarships in order to alleviate the financial distress for such vulnerable students. Similarly, in order to reduce dropouts, there could be fee forgiveness schemes that students could tap onto. Another recommendation that we have is about utilizing community centers and public libraries so as to create a e-learning section in these where students have a space not only to attend online classes but they would also be able to access basic technological assistance if they face any troubles during their online lectures. And finally, our last recommendation relates to closing the gap for students that report difficulties in access to laptop and other electronic devices. In our sample, we found 5% of students reported such difficulties, and that 5% represents the last mile which the government needs to cover in order to make online learning as inclusive and to maximize the potential that it offers in terms of learning opportunities as well as in terms of fulfilling the learners' needs from both the environmental as well as individual prerequisite. In light of those findings and the policy recommendations that we spoke about, we would like to end with some additional insights that we found through follow-up qualitative investigations. And here we found that through our conversations with students, we found that the reception to online education, when it was implemented in a planned and phased manner, was a lot more positive as compared to when online education was imposed as an emergency response. As Lina mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, online education in Hong Kong, as compared to the rest of the world, was imposed in 2019, so it actually predated the pandemic. But the experiences of students when it was imposed in 2019, as compared to when it was imposed in 2020 in a more deliberate manner, varied considerably. The other result that we want to highlight here is that even though in our open-ended questions of the survey, students reported appreciating the ability to record lectures, through our qualitative interviews, we find that there's a slight difference in response to the ability to record lectures. So there's actually a mixed reaction wherein some students are wary and not as comfortable of lectures being recorded due to privacy concerns and due to their comfort in voicing opinions which they consider could potentially be controversial. And then the third thing that we found through our conversations is that, interestingly, students expressed being motivated when they witnessed the efforts made by their teachers to try and maximize the learner experience during online classes. So for those instructors that are struggling with motivating their students, one tip that we could offer is that students appear to appreciate and they're also cognizant of the efforts that you're making. So if you're trying very hard, students will see it and they will also respond accordingly. One of the limitations of our study has been that it's based on self-reported measures, which is that both staff as well as students just report what they perceive to be the case with respect to online education, and this is based on their own experiences. However, in order to arrive at a more comprehensive understanding of online education, one which could also provide insights about its long-term effects, it might be helpful to look at actual data on academic performance, on course completion, on attendance during this period of online education, and use that to supplement the results of the study. And perhaps in future research, that is something we could look at. And with that, we come to the end of our presentation.